Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we're going to have a two-part podcast. The first part of this episode is going to be with Brian Snow over at 24/7 Sports. We're going to talk about the NCAA essentially showing its ass yesterday and creating a bunch of haphazard rule changes that I don't really think they've thought through. The second half of this podcast is going to continue our look into every single NBA prospect 23 and under or on rookie contracts with Cole Zwicker. We'll introduce him in about 15 to 20 minutes. But first, Brian, how's it going, man?
It's been an interesting 24 hours.
So Brian is very engaged in the high school basketball scene, very engaged in the AAU scene, obviously knows college basketball extremely well. And you have dealt with NCAA rules pretty substantially because you've put on events for kids like this before, right?
Yeah, I run a high school event during the year, so I kind of know some of the rules and regulations.
So when you see yesterday that the NCAA decides to create a situation where they are, quote unquote, committed to change, they want to create flexibility for kids going pro. They want to be able to allow kids to have agents on a very limited basis. They want to allow kids to be able to return to college after going undrafted on a very limited basis. They've created more, quote unquote, stringent enforcement, and they have attempted to minimize harmful outside influences by trying to, reduce the number of potential places for college coaches to be able to go to AAU events. My brain just wrapped in a pretzel because that doesn't make any sense. But I mean, what is your overall takeaway from all of this?
My biggest takeaway is that I don't want to just say the NCAA. I think that's getting it. That's just making like a boogeyman. But the people involved in whatever committee, and some of it's like Phil Martelli and coaches. So let's not take them out of the mix here. The Condoleezza Rices of the world. They have no functional understanding of how the sport works, which to me is the biggest problem, because I genuinely think when they put these changes in order, and they are changes, now they're changes for the sake of change, but they are changes, they thought they were doing something because they didn't understand the fundamentals of how the sport works, and that is a major problem.
Yeah, to me, all of this kind of screams that this committee that they put together to try and make something happen, to try and change the way that college basketball runs in light of the FBI investigation that came to light in September last year, is that, like you said, these people just have no idea. They put together a committee led by Condoleezza Rice that featured no one with expertise on the NBA draft, no one with expertise in terms of youth basketball, no one with AAU and grassroots experience. It just didn't make any sort of sense to me, and these changes reflect that. They try and make it out that the AAU system is this boogeyman that is the reason for all of this corruption, and in my experience, that's not really the case. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I enjoy watching AAU basketball. For the most part, it's a pretty big shit show. But, look, at the end of the day, it helps a lot of kids, kind of get found. And now we have this situation where they're trying to create these regional camps where the level of play is going to just be such trash. There's not going to be any sort of practice ahead of time. There are 1,100 rising seniors regionally. Is that that? I got that right?
That's my understanding.
Yeah, so they're going to create these camps with 1,100 rising seniors within each region. And they, you look in Colorado, you look in the Pacific Northwest, you can't find 400 rising seniors probably that are on the level of Division I basketball. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't know that they really know how this camp thing is going to work. Another thing I was told is USA Basketball isn't real thrilled about the idea of running 1,000-person camps. They're kind of that's not really what we do. Not to mention, where the heck are they going to put it? Are they still at the Olympic training facility in Colorado Springs, I'm assuming? There's 3 gyms there. That ain't going to work.
No, and then there's the idea we'll just move to USA Basketball real quick, because USA Basketball's involvement is the funniest thing about this to me. So the NCAA says in their statement yesterday that USA Basketball is going to be responsible for deciding who quote unquote elite prospects are that are allowed to receive agency representation. And from my understanding, there may have been some like kind of back channel communications with USA Basketball, but there was nothing like up front and no real agreements or conversations beforehand about what exactly was going to be put down in these rules. And it created a situation where John Calipari talked to Jim Tooley, the CEO of USA Basketball, in the Bahamas yesterday. And he was just like, yeah, Jim Tooley told me we have no desire to like actually decide who and who does not get an agent. It's the most insane thing to have USA Basketball decide, you know, what kids are evaluated at what level to where they get an agent. And, you know, let alone we throw in the fact that a kid like DeAndre Ayton, the 2018 number 1 overall pick, RJ Barrett, the likely 2019 number 1 overall pick, in my opinion, these are kids from the Bahamas and from Canada. What does USA Basketball have to do with them? They have no fucking reason to be involved in this.
It's wild. It's like, my biggest thing is the NCAA, and I'm using that just as a general term, they went out to empower certain groups of people and did not ask them if they wanted to be empowered, which seems like a pretty logical first step if you're going to empower someone. Hey, do you want power? They didn't do that. Like USA Basketball, they don't want to deal with this. It's just not their issue. And then like high school coaches, I live in Indianapolis, like one of the most hardcore high school coach involvement. We've got good high school coaches, states in the country. These guys are like texting me yesterday, like, so we're going to have to coach in June? We're going to have to do what? Like, they want nothing to do with it. And it's not all high school coaches, obviously, but a good number are like, I don't want to do this. Why would I want to do this? And it's like, what exactly was the point? And then the best comedy of it all involving USA Basketball is if you're going to make the shoe companies out to be the boogeyman, I don't know if USA Basketball is the entity you want to go to show that.
Very close relationship with Nike, USA Basketball. And, you know... Look, like I think USA Basketball generally does a really good job, but you can't really ignore that either. Like, is there going to be preferential treatment toward kids that are on the Nike shoe circuit? Is there, you know, what happens in a kid like Lonzo Ball's case? Like Lonzo Ball regularly declined the ability to go to youth basketball events. Are they going to say that kid can get an agent now, even though he declined all of the events? Like, are they going to be able to evaluate him as such to where he can get an agent? It's bananas to me.
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Although I will say my favorite recommendation, though, on the absurdity scale is that shoe companies and whoever are going to have to submit financial papers about their event to the NCAA to get certified, as if the NCAA is now the IRS and is going to sort through probably pretty complex financial documents to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, the thing that I got told, because agents have to do like a very similar process now from what I was told. Agents told me, like a few of them yesterday, they were just like, nobody is ever going to file that paperwork. Like, no one is ever going to do it. They're just going to have, like, no real agent, at least. They're just going to have someone else do it. And just hope that they can do it. Like, the NCAA has no real way to regulate what's happening here. Like, there's no enforcement possibility, I guess, in the world of agents.
They can't. The other thing with the agents is, I think people have a fundamental misunderstanding of what agent rules currently are, at least before yesterday. There is nothing illegal about a high school player or a college player talking to an agent, taking advice from an agent, you know, going to dinner with an agent, as long as the player pays, at least theoretically. That's not illegal.
Yep.
The only thing illegal is entering into a agent agreement, agent-client agreement, or taking money. Well, taking money would still be illegal. So basically the only difference is now you can sign a piece of paper where before you didn't. And by the way, that piece of paper can be ripped up at any time. So what has changed? Yeah,
the funny thing that I got floated by one agent yesterday was like, there's nothing that's going to change. If anything, like, we're worried that putting our name down on paper with like a certain potential high school kid or potential college kid is just going to like open us up to more scrutiny from NCAA infractions and enforcement, kind of looking at us and trying to figure out if we're on the up and up or if we're, potentially giving benefits. They're basically worried whether or not these agreements are going to set the NCAA on them whenever they cheat, because let's be clear, this stuff happens.
Yeah. And it's not changing. But again, it's like I almost think like the people like the Condoleezza Rice, like in her mind, agents, you're not allowed to have an agent, so you can't talk to an agent.
Yeah.
You're perfectly allowed to talk to an agent. In fact, I would encourage a lot of guys to do it.
Yep.
Like it's not stupid. Now that said, it's also not illegal. College coaches encourage kids in certain instances to talk to agents.
Yep.
They'll have agents come by their practice. They have no problem with it. And you would rather have it be out in the open if you're a college coach than you would them trying to work it behind the scenes where the quote-unquote illicit activity is likely to happen. So just the fundamental misunderstanding or non-understanding of what their own rules are is a major issue for me. You should know what your own rules are.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then the big thing that got headlines immediately yesterday was the idea that college basketball players who request an undergraduate advisory committee evaluation, participate in the NBA draft combine, and aren't drafted can return to school as long as they notify their athletic director by 5 p.m. the Monday after the draft. So basically, kids who go to the combine can return to school if they go undrafted. So, couple of problems there. First and foremost, this is a very limited in scope deal. Like there really is not many kids that are going to be affected by this. Just straight.
Because if you're going to the NBA combine, the whole reason is the NBA thinks you're going to be drafted.
Right. Or maybe not drafted, but because I think 70 kids or so went this year. So
yeah, but some back out. So
yeah, exactly. So there's that. This is going to be a limited in scope deal. There are going to be maybe between 5 and 20 kids that are affected. And the reason that I put that number that high right now is, so you live in Indiana. You know Chris Wilkes reasonably well, correct?
Yeah.
So if you were advising Chris Wilkes, and if I was advising Chris Wilkes, and this rule was in place, I would have told Chris Wilkes to go ahead, sign with an agent, go through the NBA draft process, have that agent tell teams, we do not want Chris to get drafted. We will take the non-guaranteed tender, which is a 1-year, $800,000 contract that is totally non-guaranteed. We will take that tender. We will basically create a situation where you have zero team control over the player. And no team is going to accept that situation because it essentially reduces the value of their second round pick asset. So Chris Wilkes would probably go undrafted. And in this scenario where Chris Wilkes goes undrafted, say he reaches his potential at UCLA in year 2 and returns to school, he is a potential Pac-12 player of the year, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly he'll be up there.
Yeah, he is a potential Pac-12 player of the year. If he reaches his ceiling, he is a potential lottery pick. That would be a potential lottery pick that, because he went through the NBA draft process, would be a free agent on the NBA market. So NBA teams will be able to bid on the free agency market for essentially a free lottery pick. And that would easily create a situation where Chris Wilkes is getting $7 to $8 million a year instead of being locked into a rookie scale contract at $3 to $4 million, followed by restricted free agency instead of a situation where he's making $7 to $8 million, where he's now an unrestricted free agent.
See, I hadn't even thought about this. So if you go through the draft process and you come back, you're not even eligible for the draft. You would not have to be in the draft again.
Right now, based off of NBA rules, no, because if you remember the Randolph Morris situation, Randolph Morris went undrafted. He then signed as a free agent with the New York Knicks after the next college basketball season.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a very real situation where I think that kids like Chris Wilkes, Carson Edwards, Bruno Fernando, Jalen Hands, all those kids, I think that they should stay in the draft, force their way into potentially going undrafted, and then just going back to school, balling out, building your stock up. Maybe you don't build your stock up, who knows? But you're still a free agent in that scenario. And being a free agent is so much more valuable than being stuck to the NBA draft process.
That and with this whole thing, take what we just discussed out of it. If you go to the combine and you're not getting drafted, you're not coming back anyway. This rule could be in place where Ollie Alkins is not coming back to Arizona.
Right. That's another thing I wanted to bring up. Alonzo Trier was
just
done.
not coming back.
Yeah.
Heck, I would even say, and even though he didn't go to the combine, someone applied to him, a kid like Kaiser Gates isn't coming back. It wasn't like Kaiser Gates thought he'd be drafted.
Right.
He just wanted to leave.
Yep. This affects so few kids.
It's such a non-issue that makes a good headline. And then when you actually start thinking about it, it's wait a minute, there's nothing here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. There's just not any substance there. There's not any real, it's a house of cards that totally falls apart once you look at it with any sort of scrutiny. I mean, you know the recruiting calendar stuff better than I do, certainly. I will just give you the floor to laugh at the problem, the, purported solutions that the NCAA has created in order to, in my opinion, give college coaches fewer opportunities to evaluate kids.
Yeah. I think the NCAA has come up with a whole bunch of different reasons why they wanted this, and they've used the FBI investigation as a springboard and as a boogeyman. The reality is when you go to an event in April or July that's certified for college coaches have to pay a couple $100, $200 to $500, whatever it may be, depends on the event, for quote unquote a coach's packet, which is rosters, and they have to pay it or else they can't get in because they have to sit in a certain section. So that can really add up. And a lot of the low majors and mid majors complained about it, so I think that actually became a problem for the NCAA. So they wanted to limit the amount of coaches' packets that would be purchased, which is a stupid reason to change the calendar, but nonetheless, it's the reason they changed the calendar. So now what they've done is they've left July similar they used to have 3 5-day periods in July. Now they're still going to have the same first 5-day period. There's going to be no second 5-day period. And then there will be a third 5-day period, but that's just going to be the giant camp. My guess is most of the top players, in fact, most of the players, period, are going to go out to Vegas with their AAU team anyway and just say, screw the camp. And I had an AAU coach ask me about it. I said, his son's a mid-major player. I said, I would advise your son not to go to the camp because he's not going to look good. Your son's just not built for camps. I would tell him, you get with an event organizer, make sure every game is streamed online, and you play in that event with a team that you're comfortable with where you're going to look better. And then that coach can watch every game on his computer and make basically the same evaluation. So I think you're going to see a lot of that. Now, to make up for losing the second period of July, they opened up 2 3-day periods of high school basketball in June, which is just a nightmare because you run into all these problems. One, the high school coaches really aren't a big fan of it. 2, it's got to be governed by certified by state federations, and they have no idea how to handle this. They have no clue. They were not brought into this discussion. So in essence, what you're going to have is people who they don't want running these AAU events now running these high school events, which is just a fantastic solution. And then on top of that, it's like, what happens if you're in Iowa or you're in South Dakota or heck, even like Mississippi, where there's just not a ton of Division I players? Like, what kind of tournament are you going to be able to run with high school teams that's going to be beneficial for anybody? It's just a nightmare. It doesn't make sense. No one knows who's going to pay for it. Are you allowed to charge the high school teams for entry? And if you are, what if a high school team can't afford it? Are you allowed to charge coaches packet for prices for coaches to help fund these things? And if you're not, how are you funding them? And then if you are, didn't this defeat the purpose in the first place? So like they made all these changes without thinking, and they just wanted to say shoe companies are bad, AAU's bad, and then hope stupid people were fooled in the process.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people just don't pay enough attention to this world, and I think that it's really important that we have these discussions because it's important that people realize that AAU is not perfect, but in a lot of ways it does help a lot of kids. There are the top end kids that sometimes do end up becoming corrupted by this, and they get the headlines. But by and large, AAU basketball helps a lot of kids.
And also, the most fundamental person that asks for money in this process, it's not an AAU coach, it's not an uncle, it's parents. And until you find a way to outlaw parents, which seems fairly difficult, there's going to be cheating.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, about these camps, the funniest part of it is, you know this, obviously, but I want you to say it for people. Who are the people responsible for nominating kids to go to these camps?
As of now, nobody.
I believe the idea is college coaches, though.
Yeah. I was going to say, now their fundamental idea is that a college coach is going to send his 30 recruits on his list that he wants to see the most to a camp. There is a 0% chance of that happening.
The funniest idea that I heard yesterday was that college coaches are going to look at the opposing, like one of their other rivals in like other conference teams' recruiting lists. They're going to go to like verbal commits, or they're going to go to 24/7 and just look through who the other teams in their conference are recruiting and put those kids down for the list.
Yeah, that's what a MAC school told me. They said, we're already forming our list of like he said for 2020 kids of who the other schools have offered in our league, the other schools in our league have offered, and who we haven't offered, and we're already formulating the list for people that we're going to recommend to a camp. I had an America East Conference, say they're just going to put 1 through 30 on the top of the 24/7 list and submit it. He goes, they think we're going to just. He's like, I'm not even concerned about the high majors because most of the kids we're recruiting are never going to be high majors no matter how well they play. He's like, I don't want everyone else in our league or even, the MAAC or what have you seeing these kids easily. I want them to have to do their own work. And it's like, and then on top of that, who else is going to, we're talking 1,000 kids here. So coaches are going to play shenanigan games. You can ask people like myself, Evan Daniels, Eric Bossy, whoever. We're not going to participate in that because all we can do is make enemies that way. So it's just there's no one to even select the camp. And then they talked about, we'll look at all city and all league lists. What?
Those aren't great lists typically, especially like, for instance, like I'm from Pittsburgh. There were like maybe 3 or 4 kids on like the all like league lists in like, and I went to like the highest classification school in Pittsburgh. There were like maybe 3 or 4 kids on those lists that went Division I, like maybe.
It's just wild. Like the lack of critical thinking that went into this by really smart people is just amazing to me. And I just don't understand how, like, even the most basic stuff, like, hey, let's talk to USA Basketball and make sure they're cool with this, wasn't addressed.
Well, so much of this was done on a deadline of their own making. And I think that that's the biggest problem. Like, Mark Emmert felt like they had to do something. He created an arbitrary deadline, and they weren't done by the deadline. So they had to put stuff down because their book report was due. And this is what happened.
Mark Emmert's obviously a very smart person. He's got like 32 degrees and whatnot. He has to be the worst, I don't know if commission president, whatever the heck his title is, of any organization in the country. Like every time he opens his mouth and every time he does something, it's totally moronic.
Yeah, no, it makes absolutely zero sense to handle this the way that he has. You should go picket at the office there in Indianapolis.
I've honestly, I told them. Now, they don't necessarily love me because of my Twitter account, but, like, I know people work at the NCAA. I said, listen, I live 20 minutes away. You don't need to buy my lunch. You don't need to pay for my gas. I'll come down. We can talk about some real-life things for 2 hours. They're like, no, we don't want to do that. Okay. You guys figure it out yourselves.
And this is what they came with.
Yeah.
Oh, bottom line, the NCAA just not very good at this. Not very good.
Really bad.
Brian, tell the people where they can find you online. Tell the people where you are in terms of work. Tell them what's going on.
Yeah, work for 24/7 Sports, cover college basketball recruiting. You can find all my work there, and then on Twitter at bsnow247.
Thanks, Brian. We'll be back in a minute here after this advertisement with Cole Zwicker breaking down some NBA prospects. Before we get to Cole, I have a quick little message from our friends at Hims. 66% of men lose their hair by the age of 35, but the thing is that when you start to notice hair loss, it's too late. Boy, do I know that all too well. It's easier to keep the hair you have than to replace the hair you've lost. If that hairline is slowly starting to move backwards, you gotta take care of it before it becomes a problem, because you have to think about it. How are you gonna feel a year from now if it's business as usual up there? Do you want a bald spot to pop up, or do you want to do something about it first? My solution for you is a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, sexual wellness for men. It is forhims.com. You should really consider going to forhims.com and checking out all of the great things that they have, because thanks to science, baldness can be optional. Hims connects you with real doctors and medical grade solutions to treat hair loss. These are well-known generic equivalents to name brand prescriptions to help you keep your hair. There are no snake oil pills, no gas station counter supplements. There's no waiting room, no awkward doctor visits. You save hours by going to forhims.com. Again, as someone who slowly but surely has some hair going backwards on his head, it really is just a tremendous product. You should order now. My listeners get a trial month of Hims for just $5 today, right now while supplies last. See the website for details. This would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. Go to forhims.com/game theory. That's FORHIMS.com/game theory, GAMETHE forhims.com/game theory for that trial month of Hims for just $5 today. Let's jump into it with Cole Zwicker right now. Cole, I figured you had no desire to talk about the NCAA because, let's be honest, many of us don't want to talk about the NCAA. It is a trash organization.
I mean, that kind of encompasses my thoughts precisely. I like reading other guys' thoughts on it. It's fun to, I guess, look at from a bird's eye view. But again, I'm all about projection at the NBA level, so I don't really care too much about the infrastructure from the NCAA. But it bears mentioning that they keep kind of stepping on their feet here as far as how they're going about their process.
Yeah, never fails. This. So we're going to talk about the Northwest Division here in terms of our prospect breakdown for people who have been listening to the series or for people who have not been listening to the series. The key here is 1995 birth dates or later, as well as anyone who is still on a rookie scale contract. So let's just jump in here. The Northwest Division is kind of loaded with young players. You have Denver, you have Minnesota, you have Utah, all three of whom I think are very strong young teams on the rise in the NBA, and that creates a situation where we have a long podcast ahead of us.
Yes, we do, and I think that's going to be the trend over the next two episodes. We got the Pacific coming up as well, so these are two divisions that are absolutely laden with young players. Yeah,
Cole and I have already had discussions about having to genuinely split the Pacific Division into two podcasts because
no matter what we do, people aren't going to like it. But we're probably going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Sacramento and Phoenix, their entire team are like players like this, so we might just have to do like a Sacramento and Phoenix podcast, and then like a LA, and who's the first team? I'm sorry, it's Golden State. Yeah. So yeah, no, it's funny. Let's start with the Northwest though. Again, we go in alphabetical order. So Denver is first on our list, and if we're starting with Denver, we have to start with their star center in the middle. It's Nikola Jokic. Really just an incredible rise over the course of the last 3 years for Jokic. When the Nuggets drafted him, he was a very questionable second-round prospect. Many people were unsure if he would ever make his way over. He came to Nike Summit. He very, very good in the time that he played with Emmanuel Mudiay. They formed a really nice pick-and-roll connection. And ultimately, I think that's what got him drafted in the second. He was a post-draft jump though. I mean, like, he went from being a fine young player that you take a chance on in the second round and stash overseas for a year to the MVP of the Adriatic League and then coming over to the NBA immediately and dominating.
Such a rare skill set for a center to have as far as the optimal playmaker. I'm not sure about historical context, but I can't remember a big who could really pass like this and you could utilize as a guy who can dribble, pass, shoot, and you can kind of run your offense through as the focal point. Just very rare for a modern big to be able to do those things. He kind of is their de facto point guard. Over 6 assists a game last year. That is ridiculous for a 5. That just doesn't happen. So you see his playmaking acumen is just off the charts. Some people say he's the best overall kind of passing big since Arvydas Sabonis. I have no qualms with saying something like that. I think he's that good.
Yeah, I agree with you. He is an unbelievable passer. I mean, let's be honest, he's Ben Simmons size. So, like, should we call Ben Simmons the best passing big man since Arvydas Sabonis? Just saying. But, you know, Nikola Jokic has developed into such an incredible offensive weapon in so many different ways. And, you know, just to talk about the passing really understates his overall impact now, because he's gone from being a good hub where you could run your offense through him to a hub that can not only have offense run through him as a distributor, but also one who can score the basketball at an extremely high level. He averaged 18.5 points a game. He shot 39.6% on nearly 4 3-point attempts a game. He had a 60% true shooting percentage, essentially being the center of Denver's offense. He is something remarkable on offense.
Yeah, he's gotten to that point where he's a volume 3-point shooter. His release is a little slow, but overall, with the looks that fives get in the modern game, a lot of pick and pops, 5-out stuff, he gets open catch and shoot shots, and he's pretty efficient at those now. He can post up too. That's something that's big with his projection as far as he can take advantage of mismatches. Has incredible touch around the basket, like elite level touch. that combination with positional size, I think, can tell us something about prospects when they possess both of those different elements in their game, and he's just top-notch there. So he can really beat you in almost every way offensively. There's not really a matchup that's going to take him away just because he has the size, he has the ability to operate in the post, he can pass out of there at a high level, makes elite-level decisions. Again, that's why you can run your offense through him as a fulcrum, is because he differentiates himself from a guy like Joel Embiid, who has a ton of physical talent, of course, a ton of natural talent, but he's not the same level of decision maker, and that's what makes Jokic more like a point center almost. Maybe not as far as initiating offenses, but as far as making the right choices and the ability skill-wise to beat you in basically every single way on the floor.
It's actually a really good question. Do you think that Jokic is just such an unbelievable outlier in terms of basketball IQ that it's not kind of worth taking lessons from his game and kind of putting them onto other prospects? Or do you think that the kind of combination of his skills in general do tell us something about potential future prospects and potential guys that have the ability to grow as they continue to mature?
I think a little bit of the latter. I don't expect, of course, most prospects to be Nikola Jokic as far as IQ, but we still can derive certain qualities about him. He's not the best athlete, of course. I'd say he's in the lower percentile for centers as far as his ability to move on the perimeter, his general like run and jump athleticism. But I think it teaches us something about if you have the requisite positional size, if you have the skill level at an elite level, and you satisfy at least a benchmark for athleticism. So you might be just clearing it, but at least you're there as far as lower level athleticism, enough to play on the NBA level that skill and IQ can win out. So I think that combination, you look and you profile forward, there are certain guys that fit this archetype, maybe to a lesser extent, but it gives you at least avenues to know that if they do hit, if they do get to a level where their playmaking, their skill level is elite, they can still be plus NBA players. I mean, Jokic, for what he's worth, I mean, conservatively, probably a top 25 player in the NBA, in my opinion. He's that damn good. We'll see how he survives, of course, defensively. We can get into that. But overall, I think it does teach us a little bit about skill and IQ, assuming you meet benchmarks of athleticism and positional size, they can still win out. And I think he's kind of the poster boy for that.
Yeah, where you place Jokic in the NBA hierarchy is very interesting, and I think this is kind of a way for us to move into talking about his defensive side of the floor. You know, the advanced analytics folks love him for good reason, obviously, because he's so incredibly efficient and does a lot of different things that tend to kind of hit a lot of box office places, or not box office, box score places. I've got Mission Impossible Fallout on the mind, clearly. And he is a very good defensive rebounder. You look at his 27.9 defensive rebounding rate. That's great this year. Denver has always rebounded at a significantly higher rate with him on the basketball floor as well. I think that can't go unnoticed, particularly given the fact that he played with Yusuf Nurkic and he's playing with Mason Plumlee, both of whom are very good backup centers. I think he's a pretty piss-poor defender, though, right now. Like, I'll just be kind of blunt with it. He is not a good rim protector. He really gets roasted out in space, and he does cause a lot of issues for Denver trying to build a defense around him right now.
So I think I'm a little bit more optimistic on his defense than you are. I'm not saying he's necessarily like a positive or a definite positive, but I think he's more along the lines of maybe slightly below average to average. His positioning is really good. He's really high IQ, so he knows where to be. I think he can get, to some places, especially in the regular season, with that positional size, a decent reach overall. But yeah, I think in space, in the playoffs, this is something I've wanted to see him in that setting for multiple years now, as far as how does he profile against these elite teams. They're going to put him in pick and roll repeatedly. I have a feeling it's not going to go well if he plays against a team like the Rockets, where James Harden and Chris Paul are attacking him on every possession. So I still have a lot of druthers about that as far as how that extends into a playoff setting, but I definitely want to see it first. I do think, overall he can win enough with his positional size and his IQ to where he's not a complete liability. I think, again, he's more average, but I do think he's going to be a negative in a setting with a guy like moving forward, say 3 years down the road. If he goes against Donovan Mitchell in the playoffs, for example, I think that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at on it. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I feel. Over the course of a full season, it's not going to show up like totally consistently, right? Because you can do different things to hide a guy like Nikola Jokic over the course of a 82 game season where teams aren't necessarily game planning for you specifically every single night. They're running what they run and then kind of going from there. I see a lot of similarities in the Jokic conversation defensively to what happened with Kevin Love before he left Minnesota. a lot of people kind of discussed Kevin Love as if, because he's such a good defensive rebounder and because the defensive metrics were pretty okay, at least maybe even high in the case of Kevin Love and Nikola Jokic, that people kind of overrated him a little bit as a defender. I think, though, that I agree with you. When he gets into a playoff series and whenever you can just kind of game plan your way into getting him into mismatch situations consistently, I see there being a lot of problems. Like, I think it's going to be an issue for Denver.
Yeah, and I do agree, especially with their personnel. I think with Jokic, what you want is a point guard defender like prime George Hill, someone who can get over the top of screens and really stick attached to guys.
Yep.
And Jokic, you can drop him back a little bit. I think that's the optimal setting. I'm not sure if Jamal Murray is that guy. I mean, he tries really hard defensively. His motor's pretty good, but as far as his overall technique, his athleticism, I'm not sure if he's there, even though he does have some size. So that's going to be interesting moving forward. Those two paired together at the point of attack in a pick and roll setting, I do think that's going to be problematic. But again, I think in a playoff series, just kind of tying back his offense a little bit, Jokic is so damn good offensively, he's going to be able to dictate matchups too. You're not going to be able to downsides against him. He's really good on the offensive glass. You're not going to be able to play like a wing on him. He's going to be able to take advantage of that. So at least offensively, he can dictate some matchups. But I do agree with you. I think in a spread pick and roll setting, if you're just putting this guy in endless amounts of pick and roll, he's going to struggle a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's it doesn't matter. Like, you know, you can game plan around him the same way that Dallas figured out a way to make Dirk Nowitzki the centerpiece of a title team, right? Like, yep. I mean, he's going to be close to 50-40-90 this year. He was pretty darn close last year to being 50-40-90. Now, he's not Dirk. I mean, Dirk is genuinely one of the 15 best players ever, in my opinion. But
agreed, you
might be able to find a way to mitigate Jokic's offensive or defensive flaws in many ways. So I would have Nikola Jokic comfortably as a top 25 player in the league right now. I probably wouldn't go as high as like some of the heavily analytically inclined folks where they think he's like a top 12 player in the league, but he's an incredible player. And, you mentioned Jamal Murray. We should move on to Jamal Murray now because to me, he's the next most important part of this rebuild. You mentioned the defense. I think he's actually been a lot better defensively than what I expected, especially coming out of Kentucky. He was a disaster defensively at Kentucky.
Yep.
He's actually I would say he's even average to above average defensively now because he really battles at the point of attack. Like he gets caught in screens sometimes, but given that he's so young, I believe he's still 20 years old. Like I actually believe he's going to figure it out in terms of his defensive ability and become like a good point guard defender.
I see right now, I think he's a little bit below average too, generally below average, but I do have some optimism with his defense. I think, honestly, as an overarching point for him, I think he's gotten more athletic in the league. I think he's someone who you watch him at Kentucky, he, like you said, he was a train wreck defensively, in my opinion. He wasn't that athletic. You saw the limitations laterally. Obviously, his motor is compensated for a lot of this, but I also think he's added a little bit of burst, a little bit of vertical pop, and a little bit of just overall general speed athleticism. It's just something to look at as far as guys coming into the league, getting on a strength and conditioning program and really optimizing their bodies. I think he's done a good job of that. With the way he competes overall, that's my biggest thing with him. Everybody knows he's an awesome worker off the floor, but the way he competes on the floor gives me some optimism where he can compensate for some of his defensive deficiencies. He has the size. I don't know if he has the athleticism really to be an impact defender at the point of attack, but he does have the size and he does have the want to. Those two things aren't lacking, and that's not a bad place to start.
Yeah, and we should move on to the offense because that's what the most important part is. I mean, he is the perfect point guard to have next to Nikola Jokic in theory. He's a good pick and roll point guard who is a very, very adept scorer because he is an excellent shooter both off the dribble and off the catch. He averaged nearly 17 points a game as a 20-year-old last season. 3.4 assists. He's not a true point guard. He's not a guy that you want handling everything in terms of distribution for his teammates, but you want a guy who's going to play hard, who's going to be able to get buckets, who's going to be able to distribute occasionally, and who's going to be able to score efficiently. And that's what Jamal Murray is. And like you said, the fact that he's gotten a little bit more athletic, he's gotten a little bit bouncier, he's gotten a little bit quicker, his body has filled out, he's stronger than what he was at Kentucky. All very, very important. And I think that he is he's a great candidate for a third year breakout. Maybe not in an all-star level, but if he averaged 20 a game this year, I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't either. And I think for him, the fit with Jokic starts with Murray's ability to play off the ball and really run off screens at a high level. That's something he did at Kentucky at a historically good level for a freshman. Like, he had really high volume off screens, and he was really adept there. He can run the dribble handoff plays. So he's a point guard who doesn't need the ball, and that's incredibly valuable on most rosters. With his dead-eye shooting, he's always going to be a gravity threat as a spacer. For me, the biggest surprise has been his finishing acumen, which has been way better than I expected. I think this kind of ties into the athleticism development there. I mean, if you look at his around the basket in the half court, 60th percentile, I think that's pretty solid. Maybe it doesn't jump off the page, but for me, with what I expected, that's a lot better. I mean, he has craft. He has enough pop there. He's excellent on floaters, and that's not an easy way to live, but 51% on floaters last year on 88 attempts. That's getting it done. Like, he has great natural touch. You see that on his shooting. So he's kind of a three-level scorer, man. That's what he is as far as I think there's a lot of issues with him coming to the league. Can he create separation? Is he going to be a dynamic kind of pull-up threat with kind of a little bit lower release point, even though it is quicker? And he really has answered those questions. I think you can really profile him to be at least conservatively an above-average scorer at the NBA level, especially operating off a guy like Jokic, where it's not like Murray's running 1-5 spread pick and roll, which was what a lot of guys were scared of with him coming to the league. I think this is just an optimal fit for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think he is going to make an all-star game. I am at the point where I genuinely believe he is going to be an all-star level point guard, maybe. I mean, the West is so loaded, right now. But
yeah,
he's that good. Like, I think, is going to average at some point 24, 5, and like four rebounds a game or something like that, while shooting 46, 47% and 40% from three. Like, that is how good I think Jamal Murray is.
I don't disagree, honestly. I was more skeptical of him coming into the league, and he's proven me wrong, honestly. And one area I will say that I'm looking forward to him maybe improving on a little bit is his pull-up shooting. I don't think it's to the level that a lot of people think it is yet, and he's so damn good as a spot-up shooter. He's like elite level on that and off screens. I think that compensates for some of the pull-up shooting ability. But I think in the playoffs, when you profile Denver into the playoffs, who's going to create a basket for them on the perimeter? Like, Gary Harris is great. We're going to get to him. Very big fan of his. But I think Murray has to be kind of the perimeter threat until maybe Michael Porter develops or something like that. But it's going to be Murray, because you can't just have Jokic create a shot going one-on-one in a face-up setting every single time. So we'll see how he develops as a pull-up shooter. That's just one element of his game that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Unfortunately, we're not going to get to Gary Harris because he doesn't qualify for this. But that damn 1995 birth date thing. But we can talk about Gary real quick just because I love Gary Harris's game. Again, another elite level spot up shooter. Very adept at attacking closeouts and getting to the basket. Interesting passer, kind of a good passer as a two guard, I think, more than a guy that you ever want to run point guard. But that's what he is. He's like kind of the ideal 3-and-D guard who you can defend point guards with, you can defend shooting guards with, you can probably even defend some threes with due to his aggressiveness. He gets lost a little bit off ball, but his aggressiveness and his quickness, his hands, his disruptive ability makes you believe that he will be a high-level defender at some point. And he's already an above-average defender, I would say, especially after last year.
Yeah, I got to stop writing down just birthdays here. Or, sorry, just ages. I had 23 here, so I was like, we got to talk about Gary Harris. So I'll just go really quick on him. Another optimal fit next to Jokic. That's something you see with this. A lot of dribble handoffs with Harris. He's excellent on those. You can shoot off the dribble. He can shoot off the catch. He can shoot off motion. And then defensively, I think he's more like average to slightly above average. Yeah. Ideally. I mean, he's not a high-level athlete. He's not like a defensive stopper, but I think he's going to be competent on that end for sure.
He's real quick, man. Like, he's really quick with his feet, and he has great length and great hands. I think he's going to be like a solidly above average defender. No, he's not going to be like an all defense guy, but I think he's going to be a solidly above average defender.
I think that's definitely fair. He just doesn't have quite the measurables, the size, or the like outlier athleticism to be like a stopper type. But I do agree he's going to be a two-way player, and I think that's a good contract for them. So yeah, these three make a lot of sense together. Offensively, especially, but defensively, at least Harris gives you some of the components maybe that these other guys don't. You're going to need more infrastructure. We'll kind of get into this as we get into more of the prospects list here, as far as maybe a wing stopper type who can kind of a combo forward defender. They need somebody like that, but I do think this trio makes a ton of sense offensively. It's almost like with Jokic, you're guaranteed almost like a top 7 offense, and you add 2 shooters like this who can really, they have diverse skills that can play make also. Just a really nice offensive fit.
Yeah, 474 for Gary Harris or 478 for Zach LaVine. I know which one I'm taking.
Yes, this doesn't require a lot of thought.
Yeah, good for Zach to get that money, though. Michael Porter Jr. is who I have next here. Is that who you have next?
Yes, sir.
Michael Porter, I mean, he's the ultimate wild card. He's the guy who can take this roster from, being what it is now, where it's, I think, going to be a 4 seed or so eventually in the Western Conference. He can take them up an entire level to where they're genuinely competing for like a top 2 seed at their peak, I think.
Yeah, he is in many ways kind of the swing guy. You profile him taking over for Millsap after, we don't know how much longer. Millsap has a team option after this season. We'll see if they pick that up. But he's the guy who you can see eventually fitting into that 4 role. Very curious to see how he plays, because if they get him to play the right way, and this is a perfect team fit for him as far as that Paul George role that we talked about pre-draft, running off screens, just leveraging his shooting at 6'10", I think he can be an absolute threat offensively for sure. He fits. He's a tailor-made fit next to Jokic. He's another guy who doesn't need the ball unless he demands the ball on these catch and shoot or stand alone jab step kind of Carmelo stuff. I don't want to see that from him. I want to see him play within the scheme of the offense. And you're right. I think he does give them another shot creator, and that's kind of what they need, is somebody else who can get their shot one-on-one at times too. So if he hits and he plays the way that we think he can, this is going to be an incredible fit for him.
It's time for me to give just a wild ass strong take. If this team is together, this exact core is together in 2021, and if Michael Porter hits his ceiling in terms of what we think he can do, you and I both believe, if that ceiling comes to pass, which I think is a major question given the injuries, he's like a 23 to 26 point a game scorer, right?
Yes, I think he can definitely get there.
So I think that if this core is still together and if he hits his ceiling, this roster as presently constructed, with Jamal Murray continuing to improve, with Gary Harris continuing to improve, with Nikola Jokic continuing to improve, with some of the role guys they have potential to break the record for offensive rating in NBA history, I think.
I like it. I thought you were going to go some relative to winning a title or something, and I'm very much on board with the offense. That's what I can say confidently, is I think they're going to be, if this core is intact, they're going to break offensive records. I agree, just because stylistically you can't match this level of playmaking from a center combined with this level of shooting. If Porter's shot translates to the level from 3 that we think it could, there are some issues there, as far as lower body mechanics. We'll see how that translates overall, but yeah, if they hit, this is a team where it's going to be really, really hard to guard them, especially in the regular season.
Yeah, they already had a 112.5 offensive rating last year, according to Basketball Reference. For a team that is this young, to have done that, I think is just totally bananas. It's really just remarkable. The record currently is 115.6 by Golden State in 2016-17. I think that the 87 Lakers are right around there in terms of the record as well. I'm pulling it up right now and kind of filibustering as I talk. But so yeah, 115.6 is the record. In terms of teams that have gotten there, Denver's offense last year was one of the 60 best offenses in NBA history already, with guys who are essentially 21, 22, 23 years old. You get those guys to 25, 26 years old, I genuinely think you're talking about a special, elite, all-time level offense.
And it bears mentioning, too, last year they were trying to work Millsap in for a lot of the season as far as the fit wasn't obvious. Adam Mares, who writes for Denver, he's fantastic. His work is great. And he has kind of touched on this throughout the process. Him and Jokic weren't on the same page to start the season. They're still trying to incorporate him. So that bears into this as well. When you get more of the cohesion, let's say Michael Porter develops with this core moving forward, and you have this cohesion 2 to 3 years down the road, that's only going to improve.
Yeah, no question. Let's move on. Let's talk about the next kind of group here. Who do you have next on your list?
I have Juancho Hernan-Gomez. I'm still kind of clinging on to the rookie year hype. I know he had mono last year, and we'll see how he kind of recovers from that. So I have a grouping him, Trey Lyles, Jared Vanderbilt are the next 3 guys on my list. Oh,
so you don't have Malik Beasley on this part?
No, I have him in the next tier.
Okay. I'm interested in hearing Jared Vanderbilt over Malik Beasley, but we'll get there in a minute here.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that any discussion of Juancho has to go directly to the rookie year. He was a legitimately very valuable role player as a rookie. Shot 40% from 3, 5 points a game, rebounded reasonably well. Not the world's best athlete, but not a bad athlete either. Like, he's not Willie in terms of his foot speed. He's a little bit quicker than that.
Oh, hell no. Yeah, he's definitely quicker, and he's really quick off the floor. That's something I saw him at Summer League his rookie year, and his bounce is actually pretty good on the glass. Like, he gets up and down off the floor. He's not crazy. He's not like Marvin Bagley or something. But for what he is, I think he deserves more credit for the kind of athlete he is if he can get back to that rookie year level. That's what so much of this analysis rests on. Not the highest level defender, of course. I don't ever see him being like a definite positive there. He taps out more as average with his foot speed potentially. But offensively, he's a guy that can really knock down threes. He can space the floor around Jokic. He's not the optimal fit next to Jokic, in my opinion. He's more of like a third big that can kind of play next to him in certain matchups because you need more defense insulating that roster overall. But I do like Juancho, and I think maybe his second year guys are a little bit lower on him, and who knows how he's going to recover from that. But I do think, like, based on his rookie season, a lot of guys had him in a redraft in like the top 6, the top 7 or so. Like, I don't think that was crazy for that draft.
What, that was the 2016 draft, right?
Yes.
Who else is in that draft? That is that's like the Ben Simmons, Brandon Ingram, Jaylen Brown draft.
Correct.
I mean, like, I'm still taking Chris Dunn, Buddy Hield, Jamal Murray, all 3 of the top 3 guys. You can't have him in the top 6, can you?
I don't know if you can now, but after his rookie season, guys definitely did. I'm not saying I necessarily agree, but that draft wasn't very strong. It levels off pretty quick, so you can make convincing arguments. Like, I liked him more than Buddy Hield after his rookie year, for sure. I'll say that unequivocally. I don't know if he'll get to the level that Buddy Hield is now as like a rotation kind of wing player, but I do think Juancho's ceiling is higher.
Buddy, no way. Buddy's like an actual... We'll talk about him with Sacramento, because I am on the Buddy Hield bandwagon. And okay. I always have been, let's be honest. But, like, no, Buddy's way better than Juancho is. I think, at least. Like, I would take Karis LeVert over Juancho. I would take... Here's one. I would take Pascal Siakam over Juancho, I think.
I think that's fair. Honestly, I think they'd all be in the same tier for me. I have to see Juancho get back to that level first before I have any kind of real opinion on him. I'm just saying, like, I think his rookie year was really good. Like, relative to that, at that point in time, I think I would have taken him over a lot of these guys.
That's fair. Trey Lyles, to me, is the next guy I personally had. Averaged like 10 points and 5 rebounds in 19 minutes a night last year. Started to really come through on the potential that he's always had to shoot from distance. He made 38% of his 3-point attempts per game. That ended up being like right around 250 attempts, if I remember correctly. Finished a little bit better inside than what we've seen from him in the past. Had a 59% true shooting percentage, was really good as a defensive rebounder, kind of at that combo big man position that he is so adept at playing. Very low turnover rate. You can just feel comfortable with him on the floor in a lot of ways offensively right now.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is offensively. He definitely is an intriguing skill set. We talked last podcast, I think, about the differentiation in three-point percentage. Like, he was 32% in 2016-17. He raised that to 38%. That's a huge difference as far as his projectability on 3 attempts per game. Underrated passer, honestly, can make some plays off like attacking closeouts. He kind of fits that ecosystem as far as he can space the floor. He can make plays in bigger spaces attacking closeouts. So offensively, I get it. I have him in the same tier as Juancho just because I think they're kind of, archetype-wise, they're a little bit similar around Jokic. They're both more offensive-minded fours, which I don't think is optimal. But again, I do think that he definitely has offensive skill. You're starting to see why guys were high on him in the draft. It's more on the offensive end of the floor.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Malik Beasley is someone that I'm interested in watching going forward. I would expect him to have a bigger role this year, just kind of given the way that their bench is going to play out. Hasn't really gotten a crazy chance to show it. He played 62 games last year, but it was in a very limited role. At least made 34% of his threes. He's always been a guy that I think can really use the threat of his jump shot to attack off the dribble a little bit. Very good athlete. I'm a fan. Like, I think he's going to be a pretty good rotational, kind of 2, really just kind of a 2. He can maybe play the 3 a little bit, but he's definitely kind of position locked.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm a little lower on him. I'm just skeptical. I don't have like any crazy takes on Malik Beasley. I just don't think we've seen enough sample yet. He's never really popped for me at any level. Like, I do agree his athleticism is pretty good. I thought his off-ball defense in college was pretty bad. Honestly, overall, like his instincts and stuff, I haven't seen that translate. But I don't have a good enough read on him yet. But all I know is, like, he's going to have to shoot. Like, if you're a one position, let's say maybe 2-position defender. Let's play it kind as far as, especially as a backup. I think you can get away with that. If you're that caliber of player and you're not bringing a ton of playmaking to the floor, you got to be better than, a career 33 or 34% 3-point shooter. He's gonna have to raise that to the high 30s, I think, to be like a genuine rotation guy. It's possible. He's super young. We'll kind of see how he develops. I'm approaching it a little bit more conservatively, though.
Yeah, I'm someone who does actually really believe in his 3-point shot. Mechanically, it's beautiful, and he's a really mature, like, good kid from everything I've been told. So I believe in him kind of figuring some things out. The next group for me, I have Jared Vanderbilt in that next group below these guys. I from a talent perspective, he certainly belongs in this kind of area. He is 6'9", a great athlete, elite level rebounder, has some point skills even. He was a grab and go guy in high school who I think even played a little bit of point guard in Texas for his high school team. Like, I get the skill set, but he really just doesn't shoot it at all.
Yeah, and by not shooting at all, you mean he's not going to shoot it at all. Like, I don't see how you can possibly project him to shoot it well, just because he has no touch. His mechanics are bad. He has a hitch in his shot. He's never been good at that. That's his one vice. If he could shoot the ball, he would have been a lottery pick. Like, he's that talented otherwise. I just think that Denver's going to get kind of creative with how they use him. Maybe as a small ball backup 5 at times, and that grab and go. I think he can do that stuff. He's the best grab and go big in the class to me. He can make reads on the move. Really hyper. As far as a horizontal athlete, very athletic. Not the best leaper overall, but definitely a guy who can switch. He's got great feet as far as that goes. There's a lot to like with him. I think the talent is there, and I think that Denver is the one team they can kind of insulate his lack of shooting, surrounding him with shooters, and maybe get creative in how they use it. I think the talent is there. The foot issues are the big bugaboo for me. Like, if that's the thing, is like, you can definitely knock him down a tier. I don't have hardline stance in this at all. Like, based on talent, I would put him in that same general tier as a Trey Lyles. I just think he deserves to be, like, mentioned, because I think his playmaking skills are even better than Lyles's are. But Lyles's ability to shoot, you could definitely say he's a safer bet with that intersection, along with his health. Like, Vanderbilt has to be healthy, and he has to be put in a very specific role to succeed.
Yeah, it's the health for me. Like, that's what it comes down to. He has been injured for each of the last 3 years at different times due to the foot injury, ankle injuries, just general lower body injuries. Some of them haven't been like super substantial, but he's also had multiple stress fractures in that foot as well. I'm worried. Like, I genuinely am concerned about whether or not he's going to be able to consistently get on the floor, but we'll see. I hope the best for him. I mean, he's a very interesting prospect for all of the reasons that you laid out. But honestly, like, I feel a little bit more confident in Monte Morris, like, kind of reaching his potential, just because I feel confident that he's a backup point guard. I had Monte way higher than most people did on my pre-draft board last year. I had him as like the 31st best player in the class. Just a really good shooter off the dribble, good shooter off the catch, really smart decision maker, kind of the perfect modern day backup point guard to me.
I mean, his decision making is off the charts. In college, if you look at assist to turnover ratio, he owns like the top 4 in the last 20 years. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah, he holds the record for assist to turnover ratio in NCAA history. It's insane.
And like, it's every year too. It's not just 1 year where it's ridiculous. Every single season he's elite at that. So I like him a lot. Obviously, I think that he has a role in the league. I see him more, honestly, as like a 5th guard. I just don't know if he can score well enough. Like, he's a good pull-up shooter, but I don't know how dynamic he is offensively. But in the Denver scheme and stuff, he's going to be playing a lot off the ball. If he can shoot it, I think he's going to have a role. I really like the kid a lot. I think I had him probably top 35 on my board too. Like, I was definitely a fan, mostly because of the decision making, but I think I'm a little skeptical on, does he have the dynamic scoring ability to really fill that backup lead guard role at a high level?
Yeah. I mean, I guess we'll see. I'm a Monte Morris guy. I will jump in with Monte Morris.
Absolutely.
All right. The next guys here, I've got Tom Welsh and Tyler Lydon.
Me too.
I've never been like a big Tyler Lydon guy. I understand that he went in the first round last year, but I just don't really get it. He's kind of I don't want to say he's like a fake shooter, because he did make shots at Syracuse. Like, I want to say he shot something like 40% from 3, but I don't love the shot from the NBA range. He also is like this reputation as a good shot blocker, and has this reputation as a good, athlete and defender. Like, it's not for me. Like, I don't really see that necessarily.
He was one of the worst rookies, if not the worst rookies at Summer League last year. He was just abysmal there. I think he's going to struggle finding a role. Like, he's another one of those tweener types where I'm not even sure what he is, like a 3-4 tweener, a 4-5 tweener. I don't think you can play him at the 5. He's not that physical. He's more of a fluid. I mean, he's a good athlete, I think, overall, but functionally it doesn't translate to the level that you'd hope for in all the different respects. So
he's a good jump athlete. Like, he has a vertical. He just doesn't. I don't think he moves well laterally. And I think that the zone hit it a lot.
I agree. I definitely think that's the case, too. And I just don't think he brings anything in a positive fashion overall defensively. Yeah, he can protect the rim a little bit from the weak side. He has enough bounce to do that. But the timing, all of that stuff, he's never really stood out to me there. He has to shoot it at a high level offensively. But I just don't see the toughness with him physically. It's just not there. He's not the kind of player. I liked him after his freshman year at Syracuse. I was buying a little bit, and then I got completely off after his sophomore year, just watching more of the tape and focusing on the projection element to this. So I see him as a fringe guy, honestly. I would not be surprised if he's not an NBA player in a year or two.
Do you have him ahead of Tom Welsh?
I have him in the same tier. I don't care, but I think I would roll the dice on Leiden over Tom Welsh.
I think I would too, but I love Tom Welsh. This is a Tom Welsh friendly podcast. We are forget the preeminent Zaire Smith podcast. We are definitely the preeminent Thomas Welsh podcast. Genuinely, like, maybe the best, like, nicest human in the NBA now. Certainly one of the nicest people I've ever met personally. Just a great dude. Doesn't miss from the mid-range. Like, that has value. Being able to space the floor out to 18 feet. He improved a lot as a three-point shooter during his last year at UCLA. He really got in the gym and worked his ass off with that, and that is a credit to him. I mean, in terms of his future, I think that he's going to make a ton of money over in Europe if he wants to go over there and really just kind of focus in on making money in Europe. He has a great game for that. He has the right size. Yep. He has some post-up ability. I don't know if I see it in the NBA, though.
I love him in Europe. It's worth mentioning. I think he got one of the 5 or 6 2-year, two-way contracts, so that's something to pay attention to overall. But I don't see him beyond anything as a fifth big, and that's like heck, his ceiling. Honestly, like, I don't know what his role is, especially on a playoff team like Denver's trying to be. Like, I could never see him getting in the game in the playoffs, for example. Like, he's just not that kind of player. You wouldn't trust him. Tailor-made for Europe, though. I mean, knockdown shooter in the mid-range. He's extended that range. I think that he has the positional size. Everything you noted, I think his game profile is really well overseas.
So let's live in a different world here for a second. Tom Welsh, I think, makes the NBA if he becomes just an elite level screen setter. He's pretty good at setting screens now and kind of finding the open spot as a roller. He needs to become just a little bit better at that. He needs to be a 40% three-point shooter, right? Like, he has to just knock down 40% from three at the NBA line. Be able to shoot above the break too, right?
Yep.
And he's probably not going to be good defensively regardless. Like, that's just kind of the way it is. But that's like a not impossible sell to me, I guess, like him being a 40% three-point shooter at 7 feet.
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm getting at as far as a fifth big. Like, if his offense hits, and he's really a true spacing big, like a real shooter and a dynamic threat where you think every time he pick and pops, every time he spaces the floor, he's 40%. I could see that. Again, I don't think there's a lot of upside, but that's his avenue. It's got to be on the offensive end as a shooter.
Yeah, I agree. Let's move on to Minnesota. Karl Towns is the key guy, maybe like in the NBA right now for me. I'm at the point with Karl Towns where I genuinely believe him to have NBA like MVP potential. He's averaged like 24 points and 12 rebounds a game over the course of the last 2 seasons as a 21 and 22-year-old. He is now just straight up an elite level shooter from three. He hit 42% from three last year on something like 300 attempts, or like right around that range. Unbelievable in terms of getting to the foul line, makes all of his foul shots, very good offensive rebounder who can kind of create second opportunities on his own, as opposed to having a guy at center who can create second chance opportunities on his own is very important because it allows you to drop back 4 guys in transition defense. Generally, I'm a huge Karl Towns guy. The defense is not good, but he's 22, and I hope that it happens.
And that's the key for me, is the defensive end. How much, it's not just about, like, he has enough tools. Like, he doesn't move quite as well as I think he was billed at, kind of like boat feet at times. He benefited a lot his rookie year where on the switches with Stephen Curry, where he stuck with him well enough. I think he's profiting a lot of that as far as reputation. Need to have better effort for him defensively. He's got to get more zoned in consistently. It's about consistent mental approach with him. He has the length. He has enough athleticism. He should be a bigger threat as both a rim protector and just a general team defender. Both those things are lacking. But offensively, he's definitely special. Like, he's historically special as far as what he can do, the fluidity that he has in his game. Obviously, the shooting, he's on pace to be one of the best shooting big men ever. He's that damn good as a shooter. His pick and pops. He can shoot a little bit off motion. He's just an absolute nightmare guard because he can attack off the dribble. Incredible fluidity as a ball handler. He can get to the rim, attack closeouts. He can one-on-one. He can shoot pull-up shots over the top. You just can't really guard this guy. Like, behind Anthony Davis, I think this is the center prospect I would take offensively. He can just do basically everything. So profiling him that way, and it's worth noting as well, the Minnesota guys that cover the team do a good job of touching on this. I still think he's underutilized as far as what he is as a player. Like, he can get more shots a game. Like, he's that efficient. I think
he took
they got to run
14 shots a game last year.
Not getting it done. Like, his second year, he took 18 a game. So you got to get that up to that level. I mean, he was 18 shots a game his sophomore year. He was 54% from the field. Like, just give this guy the damn ball more. I mean, in the playoffs, it's tough. I get, like, Houston kind of took him out of the post a little bit, but they also couldn't even make a damn entry pass. So get this guy the ball. He's an elite offensive center, and hopefully the defense comes around well enough, because I do think he can be a special. I mean, he was a special prospect. I think he can still be a special player.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a true 7-footer be able to attack closeouts as well as Karl Towns can. He's such a fluid ball handler. The threat of his shot is absolutely incredible, given the fact that he's 7 feet tall and has that high release point and the efficiency of being a 42% three-point shooter. But he is an unbelievable player at attacking closeouts. Like, he can get immediately to the basket in 2 strides, and it's impossible for defenders to do anything because he's so good at getting them off balance.
Exactly right. And I think that his ball handling, his fluidity overall, just the way he moves on the court is like a guard. At that size, you just don't see the coordination level that he has. Like, okay, so just one more jump shot point. He was in the 94th percentile in the half court on overall jump shots. That is stupid for a center. Like, that's insane. Like, all of his shots, all of his play type stats as far as, shot attempts, runners, he was excellent. Around the basket, he was excellent. Post-ups, he was very good. Catch and shoots, he was 85th percentile on 294 attempts. Like, this guy is a spread kind of playmaking 5 type that is a generational kind of talent and brings it across the board. Like, there's nothing he can't do. He's an underrated passer, in my opinion. Maybe not the best decision maker, but he has vision. He can make passes on the move. He can do everything offensively. The question with him is, how much does he really want this defensively? Because he has to anchor a defense at a higher level than he has.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I mean, he was all NBA last year. I actually thought he was better as a sophomore than he was last year, which is insane in many ways, right? Like, I guess maybe better is the wrong word. I thought he had a better season just because he was more central to what Minnesota did. So, maybe he was the same player last year as he was a season ago, but, across the board, his numbers were better as a sophomore than they were as a junior in terms of counting stats, just because his role diminished within the offense for, I guess Jimmy Butler reasons. Jimmy Butler is an incredible talent, but Karl Towns is a better offensive player than Jimmy Butler now. You honestly should not be giving Jimmy Butler shots at the expense of Karl Towns.
And I think, honestly, this analysis applies even better to Wiggins. I think that Butler, at least he initiates the offense. Like, you kind of need his playmaking, especially on that team. But I agree. You got whoever is taking more shots than Towns, you want to scale that back and give the shots to Towns. Just get him more involved in the offense. Maybe that gets him to play harder defensively. Like, that's the key here. But a guy like Wiggins, for example, should not be taking more shots than Towns. There's just no explanation for that. Even if you're a perimeter player and it's easy to get shots off in the offense, as far as, teams can scheme and take away post-ups, for example, it's not an excuse. You got to get Towns the ball.
Yeah, and look, like, I'm still wholeheartedly on Andrew Wiggins' island. Like, I'm in on Andrew Wiggins, and I agree with that. You can't give Andrew Wiggins the ball at the expense of Karl Towns. The defense is where I want to go next. It's not good right now, I think in large part because he falls asleep a little bit too often. His reactions tend to be a split second too late in terms of contesting shots around the basket. That is a pretty significant problem right now for him. He needs to get to the point where he is consistently in position at the basket, allowing his unbelievable physical tools to play up around the rim, because he has that potential. He just hasn't shown it yet.
Agree with the reactiveness completely. I also think his technique in a lot of scenarios just sucks, frankly. Yeah. And I think that's improvable. Like, that's the part I think he can improve on most, is the technique and the want to. Maybe he's never going to be a high-level reactive defensive player, an elite-level player like that, but he has the tools to at least matter if he tries and he plays with better technique. Some of the jumping at contests.
But by the way, too, I do want to bring up, this is a problem he's had since college. He had piss-poor technique in college and just blocked shots because he was so big.
Yep, and I think that did cover up playing that 2-big system at Kentucky with Willie Cauley-Stein and kind of concentrating in the paint maybe made him look like a better defensive prospect than he was overall, because he's tasked with more responsibility, right? When you have more space in the NBA, you have to react quicker. There's more ground to cover. You can't hesitate. It's not like college where you can just guard like a 3-foot space and then defend the rim. Like, he's got to be able to guard, pick and roll, recover, then rotate to like a baseline cutter, for example. He doesn't process that quick enough. And I'm not sure if that's ever going to come, frankly, but what has to come, again, is the effort and the improved technique. He's just got to get better. Don't jump at all these ball fakes. You could put together a negative highlight reel of his defense, and it would be one of the worst things you've probably ever seen from a big. And it's inexcusable for someone with his physical tools and his athleticism to be this poor. I think he can get better.
Yeah, I agree with you. There were right around like 50 guys who defended at least 4 shots at the basket per game last year. He gave up 64.4% at the basket last season.
Good God.
The numbers the players he's around, Nikola Jokic was the worst. Kevin Love was second worst. Nikola Vucevic was third worst. Tobias Harris was fourth worst. Enes Kanter was fifth worst. And then you get to Towns. That's not great company to be in. And then like DeAndre Jordan's down there. Jordan had a really bad defensive year last year, I think in large part due to malaise and like not really caring as much. But like then you get to Greg Monroe, who's obviously always been really bad. Tyson Chandler is old. It's just not a great group to be around.
It's a really bad group to be around. And Towns, he's a better athlete than all of those guys, basically. Like there's not as much of an excuse for him when you have the reach, you have the length, and you have enough leaping. He's not a crazy leaper, but there's enough there to be better than he is. Like, there's no excuse for him to be in that tier.
Yeah. The last point I want to ask you about here is, what do you think his ceiling is? Where are you at on Karl Towns? Like I said, like I genuinely believe he can be like an NBA MVP caliber player. Are you at the point where you've kind of diminished that and think he's like more of a potential top 10 guy, or do you really also still believe that that's like in the potential cards here?
I think for me, it's more of the top 10. I'm not sure if he's MVP level because, again, I don't know if the defense is coming. As far as can it be even like quasi good to, legitimately above average at a level where a lot of these big man defenders get to. It's just good enough where his offense, because obviously the offense is going to be there. For me, I can't really profile something like that as MVP level when you have to reflect also what your impact is on the team. And offensively, it's great. Defensively, at the 5, that's the position that in the NBA where you most need defense from. Mm-hmm. And if Towns can't get to a level that's respectable, I don't know how his impact on winning and on his team is going to make him an MVP caliber prospect. For me, it's just hard to see him reaching that elite level. But again, if he gets better technically, if he gets better as far as effort, I think he can be a two-way player. And then he becomes, I think, a top 5 player in the league. That's within his range of outcomes for sure. Just because, again, I think that his offense is still somehow underrated historically. Like, people don't understand how damn good this guy is offensively, I feel like sometimes. Like, it's just we don't see this at 22. He was a great offensive player at 20 years old as a rookie for a center. It just doesn't happen.
Like, it's not an exaggeration to say he has genuinely had a better first 3 years to his career offensively than any center in history. Like, that is not an exaggeration.
It's not. It really isn't. And that's the craziest thing about this. Like, you just look at his numbers.
And he came into the league at 19. Or maybe he was 20 by the time he played his first game. But, like, he's young. He's not a guy who came in early.
You know how I am about, like, counting stats and stuff. I'm not, like, all in on them. But you can't ignore this. I mean, he's almost 22 points, almost 12 rebounds, 2.5 assists a game in his career. And he's shooting almost 39% from 3, 84% from the line. He's efficient. It's just crazy, his level of of offensive output for a young player. You just, again, the ways he can beat you, he has perimeter skills at elite level. Everything I look for in a modern NBA 5, he has. It's just, can he get to a level that's respectable on defense? If he does, and if he becomes like an above average defender to like a very good defender, I think that's where you start entering into your MVP calculus.
62% true shooting percentage, 11% turnover rate, 11.8% assist rate. Just unbelievable. You look at counting stats, you look at advanced stats, you look at whatever you want to look at. You can look at on-off impact in terms of his offensive ability. Like, it is every single thing goes in his favor. It is unbelievable. They were 12 points better per 100 possessions offensively with him on the floor last year. That is, like, again, that is MVP level, like MVP caliber offensive ability. They were 8 points better when he was a sophomore on the floor offensively per game. 5 points better as a rookie when he wasn't even at the like peak of what he's doing right now. It's just totally unbelievable.
It's really hard to be that impactful as a 5 offensively. Like, it's just not a lot of guys can do that. Like, there's the elites offensively, and then there's a huge drop off the guys who are around average, and there's only a few elites. We're talking about DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis, like prime Dirk Nowitzki. Those kinds of players don't come around very often, and Towns is his impact offensively, again, is just a handful of guys at the 5 had this ability.
Is he better than DeMarcus Cousins right now offensively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so. I mean, who knows with DeMarcus' injury, right? Like, that's the obvious cop-out here is who knows with the Achilles. But I think DeMarcus can punish mismatches to a higher level for sure. Like we saw, again, Houston took Towns out of the post a little bit. They were really physical with him, pushed him off his spots, denied him entry. I think you can't do that to the same level with DeMarcus. But with Towns, like, his face-up ability, I don't think there's maybe Anthony Davis. It's those two for me. And Embiid's just a notch behind because he's not as good of a shooter. But Towns and Davis, those guys are incredibly hard to stop. I would take Anthony Davis over Towns if I was ranking bigs. I think even offensively, I might even do that, even though that's more of a conversation for me. But Towns, man, he's on an elite list. I mean, there's no way to argue otherwise, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The decision-making for me is key. I think that's what makes it basically a toss-up. I mean, DeMarcus Cousins, before the injury last year, averaged 5 turnovers a game. He's pretty consistently been a 4 turnover per game guy over the course of his career. That's just not something Karl Towns does.
Agreed.
So, yeah, do you have anything else you want to kind of note with Towns before we move on?
Yeah, just an overall contextual question, just putting all of these guys in the right context. We talked about Jokic, obviously, earlier today. For context, for me, both Towns and Jokic were tier 1 guys, like legitimate blue chippers. But just curious, moving forward, talking about the elite young bigs in the league, Davis kind of is a little bit older than these other guys, but how would you rank, especially at the top, Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid, Karl Towns moving forward, assuming you have Porzingis and Jokic, maybe a slight step down from them?
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, you're counting Davis in this or no?
Yes.
So I would have Anthony Davis number 1. I would have probably Karl Towns number 2. I would have Embiid number 2. I think I would still trust Embiid to anchor a defense and be able to have enough offense run through him to be very valuable. Then I would have Towns number 3. Jokic number 4, I think. Does that sound right?
I'm with you on all of those so far. I will say the caveat for me is if Embiid gets in better shape and he gets a little bit more mobility to his perimeter game, I think I might take him number 1, even over Davis, just because I trust his ability to anchor a defense at a higher level on the interior, and I think he's more of a physical mismatch dictator. Like you can't play certain guys against him. He's just too big. So I think his ceiling is a little bit higher, honestly, than Davis's is, which is crazy because Davis is obviously awesome. But right now, unless I see that from Embiid, and I don't expect his decision-making to get rapidly better. We've talked about that. It leaves a lot to be desired in the post and whatnot. But if Embiid does gain that, if he gets more in shape and he gains that mobility, I think I would take him slightly over Davis. But I agree with your order precisely. I just kind of wanted to suss that out for listeners.
Yeah, the big thing with Davis is that I think his shooting sometimes gets a little bit overrated in terms of what it is. Like, he took 440 shots from beyond 16 feet last year and hit 33% of them or 34% of them. Like that's just not quite good enough, especially whenever you're taking 60% of them from 2-point range instead of 3-point range. I'm a big Anthony Davis guy, but I think that that's the reason that you can make the case for potentially saying that you would take Joel Embiid over Anthony Davis. Obviously, I would still take Anthony Davis, but if you wanted to make that case, I wouldn't laugh at it at least.
Yeah, I mean, if Davis was Karl Towns as a three-point shooter, he would have a pretty easy case, in my opinion. He's not
if Davis was Karl Towns as a three-point shooter, he would be maybe the best player ever.
It's fair, honestly. Like, he's so unstoppable in so many different aspects, especially this year when he's going to play more of the five, like without Cousins and playing next to Nico as a starter. I think that Davis at the five is almost unguardable, except if you're the Warriors and you can just switch and you can scheme against him. I think he's a little bit easier to take away than Embiid, just because Embiid's so big. Like, he can just abuse any matchup basically in the post. But I think it's kind of a fascinating conversation. It kind of just depends on some inputs we don't have, mainly Embiid's physical shape. But yeah, I think these guys are all blue chippers.
Yeah, like the genuine question with Anthony Davis is, like, can he be a top 20 player ever? Like, that's where I'm at with AD. Like, I think that he legitimately has that ceiling. With Embiid, that ceiling exists, but I still need him to stay healthy for like another year and a half or so. And like, sure. Look, Anthony Davis is not the like fucking picture of health here either. You know what I mean? But he has played 75 games each of the last 2 years.
Yep, 100%.
Let's move on. Let's talk about Andrew Wiggins.
Oh boy.
This genuinely might end up being the reason that this podcast gets split into two.
It could be. It could go that way.
Andrew Wiggins. I will let, just because I've talked a lot on this podcast, I feel like I will let you start with Andrew Wiggins, other than to say he averaged 17.7 points per game this year. The 3-point shooting dropped back to 33%, 4.4 rebounds. And this is coming off of a third season where he averaged 23.6 points per game on 36% 3-point shooting. So I would genuinely say that he took a step back.
Yeah, my question with him is outside of being like a high usage guy. Let's be fair to him. Like, he has had really high usage last season, not this past season, but the season before, I think he was at 29 usage. So this guy's commanded a lot of the offense. Like, what is he good at besides like middling scoring on high usage, for example? Like, I don't know where he contributes valuably to winning, especially. Elite run and jump athlete, but not an elite functional athlete. This is something, the dichotomy there is really important with Wiggins, especially because he could be a much better defensive player than he is. I think some of it's decision making. Some of it's just he doesn't apply his athleticism. He doesn't finish plays, doesn't play with that competitive edge. And that's my overall encompassing point with him is there's just not a lot of fuck you to his game. Like, he just doesn't play with that competitive drive, and you can see that he really engages himself consistently. He's just kind of out there as like an elite run and jump athlete who can score. Like, he can put the ball in the basket. He can get his own shot. I'm not as down on him as some guys are. Like, Advanced Stats Twitter hates Andrew Wiggins because like he's a career negative 2.4 box plus minus, which is not great, especially for a max caliber player, or a max paid player, I should say. He's definitely not a max caliber player as far as his performance. I think there's value in being able to get your own shot. But, man, he's got a long way to go as far as how he contributes to winning.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. And it's not even really devil's advocate because I, like, believe it. So Andrew Wiggins and the Minnesota offense in general, I think is messy in a lot of ways. I think that they are buoyed by the fact that they have Karl Towns. And, again, Karl Towns is genuinely maybe the best, like, big man who has ever played offense through the first 3 years of his career. You look at Andrew Wiggins' career. He is taken with 4 seconds left or fewer on the shot clock. He was 15th this year in terms of shots taken there. Last year, he was like 9th, if I remember correctly. So he is like he's their end of shot clock threat, right? Like, he takes a ton of late in the shot clock jump shots because he gets asked to take those jump shots, right? Like, is that fair? And that's going to tank your efficiency.
I think that might be fair 2 years ago, but I think last year, I mean, you can argue Jimmy Butler was that guy too, right? Like, it wasn't like he was
the 15th most of them last year.
Sure,
like he took a ton.
High volume, sure. And the shot quality is not great. I think that's your overall point. I agree with that.
The shot quality is not great. Minnesota last year, by the way, had 3 guys who took who were in the top 15 of shots with 15 seconds or 4 seconds left on the shot clock. Jimmy Butler, Jamal Crawford, and Andrew Wiggins. None of those guys are named Karl Towns, and they had 3 of them, which shows how just messy and awful that offense was in the half court last year. Like, I know that the numbers in terms of their overall offensive rating were actually really good. They had the 4th best offense, but if you watch their offense, it looked like a mess most of the time.
I agree with that. I definitely think that when you talk about Wiggins, I don't think he's been optimized as far as how he's fit into a scheme. It's not like the system is doing him a ton of favors, besides the fact that he just has really high usage and he gets the chance to create continuously. At least he has that ability, and he's getting the opportunity. It's just the opportunities aren't really that advantageous. It's kind of like the Devin Booker scenario last year, where Booker had like over 30, I think it was like a 31 usage. The shot quality isn't high, but he was still relatively efficient. It's that kind of scenario for Wiggins, maybe to a lesser extent, but still the same concept.
Right. So then you look at what his efficiency is whenever he's put into scenarios that are actually useful for his game, right? He was 61st percentile last year in terms of catch and shoot jumpers, 54.3 effective field goal percentage. That's great. Around the basket on non-post up plays, 81st percentile in terms of finishing. Yep. That's great. Very good post-up guy to take advantage of mismatches. Like, he's really, really good at that. 80th percentile on over 120 possessions last year. That's absolutely fantastic. Gets a good amount of offense in transition, but not as much as you would hope, I think is fair to say. It's all of the times when he gets asked to, create off of a closeout and then take like a bullshit mid-range jumper. 35th percentile off of spot ups and not taking enough threes on those spot up attempts. Isolation, 18th percentile last year in possessions in isolation, despite having over 130 possessions in those situations. Not great. Handoffs, 35 percentile, despite having over 120 possessions there. So he's put into a lot of really just shitty positions that don't accentuate his gifts, I think. If I am running Minnesota's offense, I want Andrew Wiggins to be like the perfect kind of 3-and-D combo forward, where you want him spotting up from the corner, knocking down threes, kind of like Trevor Ariza, but you also want to run some pick and roll stuff where he can get switch mismatches, take advantage in the post, maybe back cut guys on the baseline within the kind of role and scheme of the offense. And then, like I said, just knock down catch and shoot jumpers. Like that is what you want from Andrew Wiggins. He can do enough creatively to do more than just that limited role, but he's not good enough at it to where you want him doing it all the time. And that's where I think Minnesota gets in trouble. They allow him to do too much.
I agree with your general conceptual argument. Like I would definitely scale back Wiggins' usage as far as in self-creation roles. But my question to you then is, what are you expecting for him then? Because he's not, you noted the catch and shoot 61st percentile. That's fine. It's not like he's a knockdown three-point shooter, though. He never has been. He's 33% for his career. He takes a lot of the pull-up shots in mid-range. So that definitely deflates his mid-range efficiency and his overall efficiency generally. But I'm talking about just a pure 3-and-D guy. I don't think he's a good enough shooter, and he's damn sure not a good enough defender. Like, we can get to that part of his game. I get it, though, as far as on a winning team, if he has a 29 usage and this is how you're utilizing him, you're not a competitor. You're not a competitive team. It's just not going to happen. And that was 2 years ago, scaled back last year. For me, though, I think you're paying him to be a creator. You're paying him to score, right? Because that's
he's overpaid, like, no question. Let's be clear. I am in on Andrew Wiggins, and I think he's overpaid.
Yeah, I think the contract value is kind of a cop-out here as far as that. I think that's pretty obvious as far as he hasn't lived up to that, and it's hard to see him doing that. But I think the conceptual idea behind that contract was this guy is a scorer. That is supposed to be what he does, right? That's what they're paying him to do, and he's just not efficient enough at it. You noted the isolation plays. Yes, they're hard shots, but if that's what he's supposed to be, like 18th percentile there is not good enough. He's got to be better as a pull-up shooter. I mean, he's not a good pull-up shooter right now, and that's a part of his game where he needs to improve upon. I agree. I think the best part of his offensive game is honestly his post-up ability, his ability to, when teams switch against him, he can definitely take advantage, shoot over the top of guys. He has some bulldog in him as far as in the post. Like, he'll legit get physical with guys. I think that's actually a good quality of his. But overall, I just don't know what this guy does on the offensive end. And unless you do scale back his usage, he becomes this 3-and-D guy, and he actually becomes good at both of those things, which right now he isn't. So that's just kind of what I'm getting at. Is like he's a high usage, inefficient scorer right now, and that's what he is.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of where I struggle with it, because he's put in the position to where he's a high usage, inefficient scorer when he should be like, to me, he's the perfect third banana on a team that is run competently. Like, to me, this Minnesota team, I get that they had the fourth best offense in the league last year, but it's just all freewheeling. It's all like we're going to just let Jimmy attack. We're going to take turns, basically, letting Jimmy and Andrew have the ball. And then you have to get Jeff Teague a shot. Jeff Teague's not necessarily the best guy in terms of distribution either. So that creates an issue. And then you have Derrick Rose coming in and taking shots. I think that you want Andrew Wiggins playing with a good distributor who can shoot. And that's hard to find, reasonably. That's pretty difficult to find. And you want him playing with a big like Karl Towns. I'm not a huge fan of the fit next to Jimmy Butler for all of the reasons we kind of just said. He's not going to work like that because Jimmy's lack of gravity as a 3-point shooter is just going to create a more crowded mid-range, which is where Andrew likes to go, even though I don't think he should be there. There's no coherence to Andrew Wiggins' game right now. There's no it seems like with him, there's no thought that goes into putting him into position to succeed both on his part and on the team's part. And that's kind of a failure on both fronts. I don't mean to just totally absolve Andrew Wiggins of criticism here, because I think he deserves criticized, especially on the offensive end. His shot selection is piss poor, but it's more than that to me. There are a lot of different factors here that have to kind of be discussed before we kind of write him off as a potential. I even think he still has an all-star ceiling. I think he will make an all-star.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. I'm glad you brought in. I was going to bring in the factor of you have to consider the factors of Wiggins here too. The third banana part. A lot of your argument is based on conceptuality, which I agree with. The ideal role for him. The question is, does he want to play that role? He's already came out vocally and said that he doesn't want to be the third option. I think that happened after the season. He was like, I'm not going to be the third guy in this team, essentially. And a lot of what you are as a player is what you are mentally, as far as what are you willing to do? Are you willing to do the small things? And Wiggins doesn't do the small things. He's kind of a scorer who's wired to be a scorer, and you can't really force someone like that into a 3-and-D role if that's not what they want to do, if they're not going to exert maximum energy. Yeah. So that's the thing with him is does he actually want to be the player that we think he has the physical gifts and I guess the shooting mechanics to be on a winning team? And I just have a lot of issues getting to that level as far as I haven't seen the progression in his game as far as the mentality, the approach on either end of the floor to suggest that that's going to be the kind of player that he is.
Yeah, I think that's realistically fair at this stage. To me, it's going to require Wiggins understanding better what he does well.
Yes.
We talked I wrote a few weeks ago about Dennis Schroeder. He does what he's skilled at is the worst thing you can possibly be skilled at in today's NBA, is becoming this efficient shot creator who can get inefficient mid-range jumper, basically whenever he wants. But because he's not a good enough finisher, because he's not a good enough 3-point shooter, it totally tanks his overall value. Wiggins is a good enough 3-point shooter, at least in comparison to Dennis Schroeder. He's a 34% 3-point shooter over the last 2 years. I think that's probably what his true talent level is as a shooter. He is a 80th percentile finisher at the rim.
Yep.
He needs to make the decision to focus on that. That is what he is good at. That is what he can do. And then additionally take advantage of mismatches in the post, do the kind of, 6'8", super athletic things that he's capable of. Get out in transition, create shots off of cuts. He can score 20 points a game doing all of that, I think. And he can do it in a more efficient manner. He just needs to be empowered and needs to empower himself to feel that way about his game.
And I agree with that. But I also think we say this about a lot of guys in their careers as far as if they thought this way, if they approached the game this way, they could be this good.
Yep.
But I think a lot of the limitations are the players don't think that way. They're not willing to do the little things if they don't think they're that caliber or that kind of player. If Wiggins thinks he's this go-to scorer and that's his mentality and he's not going to put in the work to be an ancillary kind of superstar role player type of player, then I don't know if he ever gets there because, again, I think the mental aspect of this is underrated, how a player views himself, the self-awareness, and I just don't see that from Wiggins. I mean, there's just nothing in his profile extending back 4 years now, plus college, to think that this guy is really going to accept a role that is beneath this high-level pedigree scorer type, and that's just not what he is. He's just not good enough at it to be that caliber of player. I think DeMar DeRozan might be someone conceptually his ceiling, but he's got a long way to go to even be DeRozan.
Do I? Yeah, he does, because he has to become a much better shooter off the dribble. That's what kind of unlocked DeMar's game. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And this is before we get to the defensive side of the floor, where he is... Okay, I will start positively. I think that when he's engaged, he is a good on-ball defender. He is a piss-poor off-ball defender.
Yep.
And it speaks to the entitlement of his game that we kind of talked about, right? He needs to understand that the way for him to make an impact is by focusing in on defense and focusing in on the intricacies of playing off-ball defense and using his physical tools to create steals and using his physical abilities to actually impose them upon the game. He has potential to do all of these things, but he just decides not to many times. Like maybe it is instinctual. I don't know. Like maybe he just has terrible basketball instincts and it's just never going to happen for him. But I just find it hard to believe that someone who is as skilled and as athletic and as talented as he is can't figure this stuff out in some way. Because like Andrew Wiggins is maybe like one of the 30 best athletes to ever play basketball, like something like that.
If we're talking about run and jump explosiveness, he's like very elite. I will say that.
Yeah, like you can, like it's not out of the question to say this dude is genuinely one of the 30 best athletes to play basketball. He's unbelievable, or at least like on the NBA level. Like he is completely elite athletically, but like the instinctual stuff is a mess. And that's a great example of instinctual awareness and acuity holding someone back right now.
And I agree. The instincts are the major issue with him, but I think it's also about consistency as far as effort, finishing plays, and applying that athleticism functionally. He doesn't challenge shots when he could. He's not the level of athlete that he could be, and it's not even close. Like the differentiation between, I think, what his upside is, if he was fully committed, fully functional, and what he is as a drop-off, that's a pretty wide gap. I will say on the positive end, we saw in the Houston series when they switched more, the Wolves, he was good on ball. I think he's good on ball when he's engaged. Like you said, he has the quicks, he has the size, he has the length to be a factor. The athleticism is never the question. It's when you get him off the ball and he has to make decisions. That's when he fails. And we saw that. One play stands out to me. I think I've referenced this on the podcast before. We're watching the Wolves. I think they played the Jazz last year. Wiggins was on the weak side guarding two guys. He was in between Ricky Rubio, Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles was in the corner. Rubio was maybe elbow extended on the three-point line. And then Wiggins closes out to Rubio. And you leave Joe Ingles in the corner, who is basically as much of a knockdown corner three-point shooter as you have in the league. Easy make. Tibbs calls a timeout and just stares at Wiggins. Like, I think he said, like, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah. And that kind of encompasses his off-ball defense. Offensively, honestly, we didn't really talk about his passing. Not a good passer. Like, where do you trust this guy to make decisions on the court? Where do you trust the intellect? Where do you trust the IQ? And if he's not going to be an outstanding functional athlete, if he's not going to have this proper mindset, I don't know, man. I don't have a ton of optimism for him. Like, I don't think he's a lost cause by any means. I'm just more skeptical.
What would you have paid him contract-wise?
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, boy. Talk about surplus value a lot on this podcast. I would want, like, 15, 16 million a year.
Okay.
Just because I feel like that's average starter money. And I think, honestly, like that's even like the slightly optimistic view on what he's been on a winning team. I think he is a starting caliber player in the league, of course, but on a winning team, I'm not sure if he is. So if he does hit, then you get maybe like $7-8 million in surplus value. If he doesn't hit, it's not a number that's a total complete albatross, and it's movable, right? I mean, they could still trade him. There's no such a thing as an untradeable contract in the NBA. But man, like this contract, I know from that point of relativity, it's a really tough sell because you're paying way over what he's worth, and you're just counting on a bunch of things to progress. But man, it really does inhibit your team building, paying him the max contract. It's just it's a pedigree signing.
Yeah, I would have said like I would have preferred to pay him something like between 19 and 21, something like that. Like just understanding that you have to bake in like the fact that he's going to get better. In terms of what he's valued at, like what he should be valued at now, I pretty much agree. Like I'd say like 16 to 18. But just understanding that you have to bake in that surplus value that someone is going to pay him on the open market. And, you know, they obviously wanted the extra year. Okay. Like that extra year at $33.3 million. It's not a number I want.
And I agree with you. I think that from my offer wasn't realistic as far as market value. You have to overpay those guys. And exactly. Zach LaVine's getting his money. Wiggins is getting more than Zach LaVine based on pedigree. Like they're conceptually kind of
based on play. Like he's better than Zach LaVine.
I agree with that. I mean, he's definitely better defensively, and like Wiggins isn't great defensively by any means. I think he's a below average defensive player, and he's still better than LaVine. LaVine's a better shooter, but I think I would still take Wiggins. So, but it doesn't matter what I'd take. Like he's getting paid more than Zach LaVine as a free agent. So some team was going to pay him. I don't buy this whole like people are like, oh, they can't move Wiggins now. It only takes one asshole if they do. Like they're going to find a team that would bank on Wiggins' potential physical upside. Again, I'm just a little bit more skeptical. I want to see some progression from his game moving forward. Yeah,
no, I think that's totally fair. Yeah, like I said, I would have wanted to pay like 86 or something, like somewhere in that range. If I was giving out this contract, not 155 or 140, something like that.
Yeah, that's a hefty amount, man. That's just you're not getting any kind of value in that contract.
No,
I don't care. Like even if the most optimistic view of Wiggins, let's say, because it's interesting and it's worthwhile to talk about how many things a guy has to do well in order to become the player that you think he can be. And for Wiggins, it's quite a few amount of things. And is he going to get better at all those things? Probably not.
Yeah,
the money's against that.
I think I agree with you. Let's move on to some of Minnesota's other guys. Just as a heads up, listeners, if you're waiting for Oklahoma City, Portland, and Utah, I think we are going to make that a second podcast because we are up to, what are we up to now in terms of time?
I never pay attention anymore. They're all broken up in installments, but I'm guessing we're probably around an hour 20.
Yeah, I think we're at like an hour, but with the intro that I have with Snow, I think we're at like an hour 30. So we're gonna go with Tyus Jones here, and then we're gonna cut it after Minnesota. Tyus Jones, I think we would agree, hasn't gotten enough of a chance to play in Minnesota. I have loved what I've seen from him every time he has been on the floor. He's kind of that point guard that I talked about with Andrew Wiggins making a lot of sense. He makes a lot of sense with Andrew Wiggins to me because he can distribute at a high level, he can defend, and he can shoot.
I think it actually makes the most sense on this roster to start. And I know that's not going to happen because Jeff T has the pedigree and stuff. And Jeff T, I still think is a good player. But as far as Tyus Jones' fit with the starters, I love that fit next to Butler, next to Wiggins. He can play off the ball, he can shoot, he can defend. Advanced stats, all-star. People love Tyus Jones. I agree with you. I don't think he's been optimized at all, basically. I mean, he's playing next to Derrick Rose in the second unit. You're playing Derrick Rose at shooting guard. That condenses the space. Tyus, I do think there's some upside. He's kind of the ideal point guard I want to pair in the modern game with like a wing initiator. Like the Suns, let's for example, next offseason, I think the Suns as a fit with Tyus next to Devin Booker, I think that's really interesting. That kind of player conceptually makes a lot of sense on a lot of rosters. I think that long term, with Tyus' ability to shoot off the catch, especially, I think that he's going to be kind of an interesting guy to monitor.
How can we get him to Phoenix? That is a great question.
Convince Tibbs that Derrick Rose should actually play backup point guard.
Yeah, that's not hard though. Like, I mean, like, what Phoenix guy can we give to Minnesota? Like, who is the Tibbs guy on Phoenix?
Tyson Chandler.
Oh my god, that'd be amazing.
But yeah,
is it like, would they take like Marquise Chris in the assumption that that Taj is a free agent after this year?
I would damn sure try if I was Phoenix. Like, I'm definitely throwing that offer out there. I'd probably attach a pick to that. Maybe not a first-round pick, but I'd give up multiple seconds with Marquise Chris to get Tyus in a second.
Yeah, I would too. And we'll throw in Dragan as well. Would you trade both Marquise Chris and Dragan for Tyus Jones?
Ooh, that's a great question. Especially when you can sign Tyus as a restricted guy, but you would get his rights. I would definitely think hard about that. I want to see Dragan 1 year under Igor, but that's just me selfishly. Like, based on what he's done in the league so far, I think an objective observer would do that trade.
Yeah, I don't know if I would. That's hard. That's really hard. That's just like, it's a hard sell to do that if you're Ryan McDonough.
Yes, 2 top 8 picks for Tyus Jones. I'm not sure if that's going to go over the best politically.
No, you might get fired for that. Tyus Jones, though, I think he's going to be a like George Hill-ish starting point guard in the NBA at some point.
I'm with it. I think he tops out maybe as like a top 12, 13, 14, 15 point guard. I think he's above average, but just only slightly so. Like, I don't see the high upside, but as far as his ability to contribute to winning, I think it's there.
Yeah, I would even go lower than that. I would say like top 20, maybe.
Fair.
But that's a starting point guard in the NBA, and in the right situation, there's a lot of surplus value there. Super good in the pick and roll, obviously. Again, his defense has been super underrated. I think, throughout his career. He's a very good defender.
Agreed. And he makes great decisions. I think that's another thing is like you can trust that guy to make reads. You talked about it in pick and roll. I just love I like smart guys who have positional size, and he's okay as far as size. He's maybe a little bit undersized, but overall, I think it's good enough to where, in conjunction with his shooting and ability to make decisions, I think he's an easy fit. Even if he's a reserve, I think he's definitely a rotation player with starter upside. And I like your top 20 assessment. I think that's I'm not sure if it's the likelihood, because that might be a little bit too optimistic, but I think that's more within his realm of outcomes. I could see him being that caliber of player in the right fit.
Minnesota took Andrew Wiggins light in the NBA draft this year. Josh Okogie. 6'4", 7-foot wingspan, takes a lot of bad shots, but someone who plays a little bit harder, I would say, than Wiggins does. But offensively, like, they do a lot of the same stuff. Like, Okogie pulls up too often, takes a lot of bad shots, was on a really bad team where he had to kind of take on a lot of usage early in his career. But I think he's going to be a little bit more inclined and willing to jump into a more, I guess, role player-ish role than what Wiggins has shown so far.
I agree with that, just because Okogie doesn't have like the high pedigree entitlement to his game. Like, he was never an elite level prospect, so I think he's going to be more willing to fill a role. He's going to have to. It's not like he's going to be able to play the way he did at Georgia Tech on the Wolves. He's just not going to have that kind of creation burden. And like, even in summer league, I think he played outside himself a little bit too much. I'm very curious to see what he does in a more refined role. I'm a fan of his shooting off the catch in rhythm. I think that's there good enough to be a 3-and-D guy. Very curious on his off-ball defense, because that was kind of underwhelming at Georgia Tech. Can he make the requisite decisions? He can definitely switch. I love his center of gravity as far as his length, his strength level. He can do that stuff. He can carry out that scheme. For me, it's going to come down to his finishing. As far as in advantage situations, he's not a good finisher. As far as like body control's okay, not that explosive off 1 foot. I think his combine stats or his vertical overrates his athleticism vertically. That is a 2-foot load leap. That's not a 1 foot on the move finish. So we'll kind of see how the overall package goes, but the less is more with him. I think if you can scale back his usage, make him more of a 3-and-D guy, I think he can potentially be like a legitimate combo guard, 3-and-D guy that can defend some threes. I think that he has the length, he has the strength. It's a really intriguing fit. Yeah,
I think that he's going to be a good rotation wing. I kind of make jokes at the top about how he played a lot like Andrew Wiggins in college, but he's actually like a very interesting player. He's a very smart kid, very self-aware kid as well. I'm generally a fan of Josh Okogie and think that was a pretty smart pick by them. The next guy I have on my list is Keita Bates-Diop. It's a good sign for their 2017 first-round pick. Keita Bates-Diop, 6'8", 6'9"-ish, 7'3" wingspan, can shoot a little bit from distance, smart team defender, very slow in terms of foot speed.
Yes, I think that encapsulates him very well. I watched him up close in summer league. His length is a problem as far as defensive. Like, he gets in passing lanes, he will harass shots. That's going to be a real thing. It's just, can he be quick enough? I don't think his feet are terrible. His feet aren't great, though. And I think it's more, honestly, his leaping ability leaves a lot to be desired. Like, he's not a good leaper as far as contesting around the basket. He does have the length, but I don't think he quite has the bounce to be like a dynamic weak side rim protector. He's going to have to shoot. That's number one thing with him. I think he can shoot a little bit off some down screen actions. We'll see how he gets incorporated that way. But I think overall, conceptually, Okogie plus Keita Bates-Diop for Minnesota, I think that was a really intelligent draft. It made a lot of sense on this roster, getting guys who can just fill a role, play both sides of the floor. We'll see how well they do that, but I think the idea behind these selections was spot on.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I like the Anthony Tolliver signing. I theoretically like the James Nunnally signing, just because he was one of the best shooters in Europe last year. The defensive part of his game and foot speed in general it's a question, but I like the signing. I think it's smart to give him 2 years and see if it works out. It was a competent offseason from Minnesota, I thought.
I agree. They made a lot of moves that I agreed with. I mean, maybe bringing back Derrick Rose on the minimum isn't my favorite, but it's the minimum. So I guess it's not completely, it doesn't tank your season, although I don't like playing him as the backup too.
Yeah, I agree with that. Justin Patton, number 16 overall pick last year. I had him, I think, at like number 29 or so on my board. He's like an interesting athlete who doesn't get as much out of his athleticism as you would think. An interesting shooter who doesn't quite shoot it as well as you would think. I mean, he's just very raw still. And I don't like taking raw big men at 16 overall.
I get it from like a little bit of a talent perspective. I don't get the pick. Let's just be clear about that. I vehemently disagree with it. But I guess as far as him as a player, he can shoot the ball a little bit from range. I'm not sure how much I buy that. Exciting to NBA 3 above the break consistently. And he blocks some shots. I didn't think his interior defense, I thought it was a little overrated, honestly, at Creighton, as far as his decision-making, his reactive stuff. Like, he is athletic. But, man, as far as a thought process input, why the hell would you take this guy at 16 when you have Karl Towns? Like, what is the upside to taking a backup center who you're not going to play both? You're not going to play both of them, right? I mean, I know it's fun to joke about this.
You're way overestimating this because they not only had Karl Towns, they have Gorgie Jang as their backup center. So they took a third string center because they had Gorgie Jang signed for 4 years still when they took him. They took a third string center, realistically a fourth string center because they had Cole Aldrich at the time.
And like a center only. Like, let's say John Collins, they took him. Yeah. At least he has some versatility to his game, right? You can place him 4. Ideally, maybe he's an offensive 5, but he's a little bit more versatile. Can you imagine what this team would be like if they took OG Anunoby at 16? I know the medical stuff, but this is one of the general inputs that, even at the time, it was like, what the hell are you doing? Why would you take Justin Patton here? Like, there's no upside on your roster. Maybe you think Justin Patton in a vacuum has some upside, even though, yes, I agree with you, he's raw. But this was not the team to take that risk. I mean, at 16, I could understand it maybe in the late 20s, but there were better players on the board who could actually contribute to your team now, and it could fill a role and build around the actual infrastructure that you had.
Yeah, I mean, I would have taken John Collins. I think I had Collins at like 13 on my board. That one just made the most sense to me. I understand that, I thought of him as like a combo 4-5. But he's an athlete. You could play him next to Karl Towns. Towns' spacing ability made a lot of sense. I would have then probably, like, the problem with all of this is that they didn't even take the best center on the board because Jarrett Allen is very clearly better than Justin Patton, and he's a year younger. And like, yeah, I don't know, I'm done. I can't. Let's move on. I want to talk about Jared Terrell because I love Jared Terrell. Do you have strong Jared Terrell takes?
I don't, honestly. I mean, I know I'm just basically via the tournament in that game, so I don't have a lot of precedent working with. So this is all you.
What was your? I will allow it. What was your first Jared Terrell take?
I mean, the defensive intensity, that was the first thing that stuck out to me, is like the lateral agility and just kind of the approach that he took. That kind of jumped off the screen. That was my first overall takeaway. He
is 6'3". He's super long. He is strong as shit. That dude is 220 pounds, and it is like all muscle. 17 points a game, 44% or 41% from 3 last year, 82% from the line. Man, I am a fan. I think he makes this team. Like, I genuinely believe he makes this team.
I do too, honestly. I think just conceptually, from the limited view that I've seen him and what the Timberwolves need and what they value, we saw them pick up Marcus Georges-Hunt last year as far as I think he ended up getting like a partial or something. He stayed on that roster. They need just more of those 3-and-D guys who can fill a role. So you just want to take as many bets on those guys as possible.
Yeah, I think so too. Cole, like I said, we're going to cut this podcast now. Tell the people where they can find your work.
It's so great because we're cutting Pacific, but now we're cutting the Northwest too.
Yeah, like the way, just for reference now, because Cole and I thought we could get through the Northwest in one go, but now that we're, I think, an hour and 40 minutes into the podcast, we're gonna cut it because we still have 3 teams, and these 3 teams, like Donovan Mitchell's in this fucking podcast still. We still have a lot to go.
Oh yes, we do.
So we're going to cut it here. We're going to do a second podcast on the Northwest Division, and you can expect 2 podcasts as well on the Pacific Division, just because that is the most loaded division for prospects right now. The Lakers, the Kings, the Suns, all of those guys, like half of their teams are young players at this stage. So we're gonna cut that in half. We're going to cut this one in half as well. Cole, again, tell the people where they can find your work.
As usual, at thestepin.com, I've written actually 2 things recently getting into
I'm shocked. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a weird month, man. I've been reading, Clash of Kings, Game of Thrones, watch Kentucky basketball. I'm just kind of grabbing for lifelines at this point, so definitely going to write more. I wrote profiles on RJ Barrett and Nasir Little, so check that out on the Step In. We've had other features. Alex Kungu, who we just picked up, wrote a feature on Cameron Reddish. Jackson Hoyer writes for us, wrote an awesome piece. He is obsessed with mid-majors. It's crazy. So he wrote like this 10 mid-majors prospects to watch. So you can find that all actually. Yeah. So I think he didn't include guys like from Gonzaga, the obvious guy. So it's definitely a worthwhile read. So check that out on the Step-In.
He included my guy Dylan. Is it Windler? I don't know. He plays at Belmont though.
Yeah, everybody loves that guy now. It's kind of funny. Like that's definitely picked up some steam. He's a good player. I've watched some highlights of him.
Yeah, he's interesting. He's not like even for sure a two-way player, I don't think. But like he's interesting at least.
Sure.
Go to theathletic.com, subscribe, keep me employed, please. That would be excellent. I just wrote yesterday about the rule changes within the NCAA itself. It is a lot going on right now and how those changes will affect the NBA draft. Again, there are going to be a lot of podcasts coming out here in the next week and a half. So please go subscribe to this podcast, rate it 5 stars, review it. We really appreciate it. But until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.